What am I gonna make? But now I'm out of snacks. So yeah, I'm making a tower. It's a hobby classic that I've never done before, but it's also been done to death. But this is no ordinary tower. My Orcs and Goblins army has transitioned into a troll horde army. The thing that initially drew me to the Orcs and Goblins were all the monsters, so if I can make an army with just monsters, I'm gonna do that. And because I'm new to the hobby and I don't really know what I'm doing, I looked at other people's troll horde armies to see what they include, and a lot of them include a Bonegrinder Giant. Googling Bonegrinder Giant, make sure I said it right. I said it right. For those of you who don't know, a Bonegrinder Giant is just a really big giant, double the size of a regular one. And when I saw it, I knew I had to make my own. I knew I wanted to do something a little bit different, but I wasn't sold on any of my ideas, so I let it cook in the back of my brain while I worked on my army. Then as I was working on my bridge troll, it hit me. What if the giant was wearing a tower as armor? Arms bursting from the sides like a giant walking tower. If I can include a bunch of ruined buildings into units and bases, I think that'll tell a really interesting story. Also, it'll tie everything together to my GOBLANDS setting. As I was conceptualizing this tower giant, I tossed around the idea of making it an ent, and the tower being like a plant pot that it's outgrown. And I thought that idea would look awesome, but it almost made too much sense. I think it's a lot funnier if the giant is just a regular giant wearing a tower. So with my idea settled, I started doing some concept sketches. Whenever I had free time in between life moments, I would be drawing out new ideas. I thought it would be fun if the tower was kind of Mordheim inspired, and then I thought it would be really cute if the giant was wearing a Mordheim spire as a hat. So I started making the tower in the classic fashion, cutting away pieces I wanted to be destroyed, cutting out spaces for windows, making sure I do all the construction before I start bricking it. This was such a big build, I knew I had to be smart about how I approached it. I had to think about how I was going to paint everything, how it was all going to fit together, make sure it all fit on the same base. I needed to think about all of this before I started building. I hate planning ahead, but when I don't, I mess things up or I waste a bunch of time. So, planning. I thought for far too long, finally deciding I was going to cut the tower in half so I could reassemble it around the giant. This meant that I could test fit it as I sculpted the giant, and this ended up being really important. I found these perfect arched window shapes in a piece of garbage, but unfortunately I didn't have enough to make all the windows, so I came up with this genius level solution. I bought these square skewers to make beams for this project, but the tops of them, when glued together, create a perfect arch shape that's almost the exact same scale. So I made a bunch of them and then backed them with this metal from a pencil holder. This meant I didn't have to mess with any sort of glass effects for this project. Originally my plan was for these shuttered windows to open, revealing his peepus, but the proportions of my sculpt didn't really work out this way. But that's fine, this build is stupid enough without this idea. Just ignore the state of my desk right now, I just wanted to talk about the construction of this thing. I am extremely proud. We've got these working shutters. All of these window details that I'm putting in before I do the brickwork. The interior is extremely satisfying looking. I'm putting in all of this construction and it all goes together pretty well. Yeah, I'm just really proud of all of this detail that I've put in. I'm not being lazy and skipping to the fun parts. I'm actually working on the construction and thinking through things. It's just a lot of engineering that I had to do, and I'm extremely proud. I was dangerously low on supplies for this project, but I was determined not to go to a hobby store. But all of my glue was dried up, so I did have to go to the dollar store. While there, I may have got a bit distracted.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
With the glue in hand, I was ready to brick. I cut all these bricks out by hand and made just enough for this project, which was totally lucky and not at all planned. Seems like there was a lot of luck involved in this project. Okay, so what I've done is I've bricked the inside. Currently it's being held together by an elastic band. I'm going to brick around the outside, making sure that the pattern lines up, but making sure that I don't glue the two halves together. I want to be able to take it apart so that I can both paint the inside and so that it fits around the model later on and I can take it on and off as I'm sculpting that. Yeah, it's more bricking time. This is the most peaceful, chill, fun crafting that I've ever done. I get it. I get it. So it turns out gluing bricks can be so meditative that you forget you're not supposed to glue along the seam. I realized my mistake, but just decided to keep going and see what happens. And later, when I tried to tear the tower in half, it worked. Nice. After bricking the whole thing, I cleaned up the rough edges and the back of the battlements with some air dry clay, and with that, the tower is done. Now it's time to make the giant. The armature had to be really strong, so I braided together 2 wires with the help of my drill. Then I fussed around for too long, making sure that the arms lined up with the tower and the legs lined up with the base. I bulked out his body with aluminum foil, making him as thick as I could while still fitting within the tower. I should have just made him skinny since the tower covers up his body anyway, but I just love chunky boys so much I couldn't help myself. A common theme for this project was, stop focusing on that, it's gonna get covered by a tower. Now I tend to get lazier and lazier as a project goes on, so to make sure that everything gets a good amount of attention, I'm starting with the parts I like the least, which for me are the feet and the hands. Once I was happy with the body, I put it in the oven to bake. It just barely fit. And yes, it did fall over. It was fine though. Part of the fun of scratch building is that you can make your pieces completely unique. I personally don't like that giants just look like giant humans. To me, like trolls and goblins and orcs, they're like a different species, so they should have wildly different features. So to get the effect I wanted, I looked to one of my favorite sculptors for inspiration. Boris Wallenstein. He is a master at unique creature shapes. A lot of his creatures have very bulbous eyes that stick out from the head, so I started from there, and then I took inspiration from other humanoid-esque creatures from my favorite 80s media. The other thing I was thinking about while sculpting the face was that I didn't want this giant to be angry. I know Warhammer is a game about fighting to the death, but I thought it was just funnier if this creature was causing mass destruction almost by accident. I wanted it to be really happy and dumb and not really know what's going on. At this point, the cheap balsa wood base I was using was far too unstable and wobbly, so I cut out a piece of hard plastic from my junk drawer, which created a much sturdier base. I mean, this giant is massive and this base is tiny, so it's going to have a lot of wobble no matter what, but to help it out, I filled the base with some metal scraps and washers that I had lying around. Then to finish it off, I added some rocks and modeling paste. Now back to the face. I sculpted the face details with green stuff. I worked on each part separately so I didn't accidentally smush all my hard work. God, he is weird looking. I knew I wanted to give him BFG ears, so I cut a shape I liked out of an old tea tin, and then added the details with a mix of green stuff and milliput. I tossed around a couple of ideas for the weapon, finally deciding on a flagpole to tie it into the tower theme. As this is my first time bricking, there were a lot of ugly gaps, so I filled them with watered down modeling paste. I took the cap from a superglue container and attached it to a piece of trash to make a spire shape. Then I began the daunting task of gluing shingles. The thing about shingles is...
shingles are very painful, which is bad if you forget.
It is as bad as everyone says. Shout out to the Mordheim builders out there. Once it became impossible to glue more shingles, I sculpted the rest out of green stuff. But wait, there's more! I shingled the roof of the Oriole as well. Then I sculpted the finer details, added the ears, and blended any unsightly areas. Then to finish it off, I made a flag by forming a piece of plastic with a flame. And with that, I finally get to see it all put together. I was really happy with how the giant was looking. If I were to do this again though, I would cover the whole thing in maybe liquid green stuff or something else that had a little bit of flex to it. Sculpey is great, but it is also brittle, especially with parts that are this heavy and this long. It can crack really easily. While we paint, let's do a little story time. Imprisoned in a tower from an age long forgotten lied a mighty giant. One day, the creature was discovered by a foraging goblin. The goblin brought the giant food every day, allowing it to grow bigger and stronger. Eventually, it broke free from its chains, but enjoying its life of leisure, it remained in the tower. Goblins passed on this hidden secret, and together they fed the giant for generations. One day, the goblins failed to bring the giant's food, so it rose from its resting position. The tower that once imprisoned it was wrenched from the earth. Unaware of the passage of time, the giant believed the only explanation for its sudden growth was its own great magic. Among the surrounding castle structures, the giant spotted a perfect wizard's hat. Its arms burst from the tower and ripped the spire from a nearby building, placing it atop its head. All it needed now to become the greatest wizard was a wand, so it ripped a nearby flagpole from the ground. A tower and wizard combined, it believed itself to be the greatest wizard of all time. The Grand High Wizard found the goblins who fed it all these years. They climbed the tower and together rode off to new and exciting lands. The Grand High Wizard gets very upset if you do not address him as such. The goblins know this, but their enemies do not. Often they'll call out orders to slay the giant. The Grand High Wizard takes great offense to this and smashes enemies with his wand. I mean, magic. Painting this went pretty well. He ended up being a bit more red than I wanted. I was picturing more of an orange creature, but I still like the way it looks. I have half a dozen aprons in my studio because I'm such a messy person. Whenever I'm oil painting, I'll often change my clothes entirely and wear gloves, but I guess while I'm mini painting, I forgot that I am who I am because... Yep. I wanted the flag to look like it was previously part of a noble kingdom, so I gave it a blue and yellow regal color scheme, and then a troll handprint on top. They're marking it as their own. This is their flag now. Once the tower was mostly dry, I added some flock to it to make it look more like a fairy tale tower. I did a little static grass on the base, and I'm gonna call it done for now. I used all the Sculpey and all the milliput I had for this project. This build is absolutely crazy, but somehow my next video is going to be even crazier, so please subscribe and stick around. If you want to see me make more videos like this, please consider joining my Patreon. Joining at the lowest tier would mean I was able to afford more milliput and more Sculpey to make more crazy monsters. Before I call this tower giant done, I'm going to add some goblins to it. My friend Paige suggested I make a goblin scaling the tower from another goblin Rapunzel, and I think that that's great, but let me know what you think should be on this tower. God, this build is dumb. Is it cool? I don't know. Bye.